Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusik. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a licensed therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With us on today's show is certified Pathfinding Coach Hillary Spiritos. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maillard. How you doing, Duck?
You know, today I'm feeling old today. And not just because our guest talks about youth and the younger generation, but also just physically. I'm in one of those days where my knee hurts a little bit, my back hurts, you know, my voice has been hurting. Like everything's breaking down. Do you have days like that where you feel your age, or you work out, you probably feel great. You probably wake up with the sun and feel terrific.
Well, you do complain about that stuff a lot. You do have it seems like an inordinate amount of injuries.
I lived a hard, look, you were on the road rock and roll, and I was skateboarding and throwing myself down, stairs and things. So my body is paying the price for it now.
Well, I feel like I've reached the sort of denial phase of middle adulthood where I'm like, I feel these things creeping in. I feel if I, overdo it, it takes a couple days to get over the soreness or whatever, but I just push through it. I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to keep doing it until I get stronger, and I'm going to keep doing it until I don't notice that it hurts.
Well, that's the thing. Like I'm really into golf in the last few years, and I try to plan ahead for like, okay, I'm going to play on Wednesday. And if I wake up on Tuesday and I'm like, oh, my back feels tight. Is my back going to be good for golf tomorrow? And then like, I don't want to spend $50 on a round of golf and not be able to play. It's like, it's frustrating when it affects my leisure and the things that I really want to pursue and have fun with.
Well, there's
playing
proactive
softball with you on Sunday.
Yes, absolutely. And in order to play softball every week, I have to do a certain amount of proactive work, strengthening work, things to keep myself. Because when I go out there and I feel sore, stiff, inflexible, feel like I might hurt myself, I'm worried I'm going to hurt myself, like I don't have fun. So part of the reason why, other than vanity, that I work out as much as I do and I try to stay strong and do all the things that are self-care is because I like feeling good when I'm playing. Yeah. I like feeling strong. I like feeling like and it's harder and harder to do that. You notice it that you lose it much quicker as you get older. It's like it used to be when you were in your 20s, you go out and you run around and you're like, oh, this is easy. Yeah. And you take it for granted. You don't say that to yourself, but looking back, I remember feeling that way. Now, if I don't do anything for a week or two and then I go and I play, I'm like, oh, my body feels sluggish and everything feels kind of, and I'm like, I'm worried I'm going to hurt myself. And so it's like constant upkeep to try to maintain.
But that's the cycle that's impossible to kind of get on top of. It's like my doctor tells me to strengthen my knee, I have to work on my quad muscles. Right. But I can't work on my quad muscles if my knee hurts. You know what I mean? Right. So it's like, how do I ever get ahead of it? Same with my back. Like, you got to strengthen your back, but you can't work muscles in your back if your back is sore. It's like... So.
It is a real challenge. I've noticed that because my biggest injuries have been to my shoulders, and I'm throwing as well as ever. However, my shoulder is always sore, constantly. But I notice at least when I'm in the middle of a game and throwing, because there's adrenaline running and I'm warmed up and everything's in rhythm. But it's the next day or when I go to the gym and I try to do my, you work on your tendon muscles with the bands.
Plyometrics or something.
Something like that, whatever.
Is that what Jack LaLanne called it in the 50s?
Sure.
Dynamic tension.
And isometrics and all that stuff. No, I do general strengthening, but then I try to do things specific to trying to minimize the amount of pain that I have in my shoulder. And it's like, yeah, exactly. Like you're doing that the day after throwing a bunch, and it's like, is this actually good, or should I be doing this? But if I don't do it, and then I come back out there and do it again, I feel it. So it's like, where is the balance? But I don't know. Ironically, it feels like the more within reason, as long as I don't overdo it, the more that I'm doing, the better that I feel. But I always feel a little bit old.
Well, this has been another episode of Old Men Complaining. Thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week when we talk about our prostates.
Get off my lawn.
Exactly. But no, we like I said, it's not just the my body. It is also the conversation we just had with our guest Hillary Spiritos today, who is a coach for youth. She's a youth coach. That sounds like she teaches Little League.
She works at the rec center.
Right. No, she works in a very specific kind of niche in terms of helping Gen Z and a younger generations kind of navigate the unique difficulties that they face in society today, the things that we take for granted, the things that we learned through trial and error, or maybe because we were a different generation, we know how to do, and a lot of her clients do not. It's a really unique sort of place to be, things we don't think about as the old men with body pain.
Yeah, I was really interested in her and this conversation because we've had a lot of coaches on, but we've kind of moved away from that a little bit. We've been focusing more on performers and artists and things like that. But every now and then someone comes along whose platform kind of really relates to things that I'm thinking about. And, we're trying to talk about things that people are thinking about, the things that are on people's minds. And certainly today's world is a challenging place to navigate, in particular for young people that are coming up and entering the workforce and trying to figure out, like, where's my future? Like, how am I going to find security, but how am I going to find happiness? And all the things that we're searching for, we're finding a lot of strange models of what is supposed to be happiness and what is supposed to be success. And so how we define those things is really important, and how we navigate the world. Sort of ironically, just last night I was watching a special that the Daily Show did. I watch the Daily Show pretty much every night, which I think is a great show. But they do every now and then where they go and they interview people at a MAGA rally, Trump supporters and stuff, and it's of course satire. It's intended to make these people look stupid, and I'm sure it's some
doesn't
of that
take
is
much.
They
don't have to work too hard.
Well, I'm sure they take the most embarrassing moments and edit those into the show, and I'm sure there are other people that might be a little bit more thoughtful and have more intelligent reasons why they support that movement. But at the same time, it's disconcerting. It's, as much as it's funny, it's disconcerting to see how lost a lot of people are and how led astray they can be. And on last night's episode, Jordan Klepper, he was interviewing, young people in particular, as we're going to have this conversation today, and young men in particular, about why this vacuum is being filled by the manosphere, and about, the voices that are speaking to this sort of, I hate to use the phrase toxically masculine, but sort of very...
an aimless generation, an aimless group of men.
Yeah, and men feeling diminished and feeling like the world has been feminized. And I think things that on the surface just sound misogynistic and sound narcissistic, but then when you actually listen, this was the first one in a while that I actually ended up having compassion for these people, because I understand that the world that they're navigating is confusing, and the images that they're being presented are not just confusing, but oftentimes aimed at taking advantage of their confusion. We have this sort of context of social media and the online world of, the reality is whatever I say it is, and people are being brainwashed and gaslit into believing things that either aren't true, or just filling in this void of people feeling like they don't have certainty about who they are, what their future holds for them. And so you understand, when you watch this, you start to gain some perspective as to why these people are pliable. I mean, all young people are impressionable to a certain extent. We're all looking for some direction and purpose in our lives and discover our identity. In a world that's so complicated and confusing, that can be an even more difficult process than usual.
Yeah.
And so people come along and they see that and they say, well, here's an opportunity to get my agenda in there and to recruit a whole legion of followers, right?
Right. It's so unique for our generation, because we grew up in a world without social media, without the internet, for crying out loud. And it's like, so we saw it from the very beginning in a way that affords us a knowledge and experience, a perspective that maybe kids don't have. For example, if we get a phishing email or a Nigerian prince is asking us for money, like, it's so ingrained in our DNA to know, well, that's a scam. I'm not going to give somebody my email. But there is a generation of kids, or our parents' generation, the other way, who didn't have the trial and error of knowing, don't click on that, that's going to put malware on your computer, that could fall for things like that. You know what I mean? And so sometimes there's no substitute for experience. You can try to teach kids, and you can try to have a coach who can say, here's what you need, here are the skills you need. And this is just applying to social media. This is just life in general. It's like we expect the youngest generations to come into the workforce and do things the way we've done them, forgetting that we had our 20s where we had crappy jobs and we failed and we crashed out and we maybe moved to a new city and we did all these things that through trial and error. Now we're in our 40s and we're like, well, we're secure, we have our lives, we have our house. Like, we have to give them a little bit of leeway to figure this out. And the problem is that their world is constantly changing at a rate so much faster than ours did. You know what I mean? The internet is like an exponential rate of whether it's AI, whether it's, deep fakes and the things that we were so concerned about, that it's impossible to stay on top of, to know what am I supposed to, what's a role model for me to look to, what's a goal for me to try to achieve, you know what I mean? And I think that's what Hillary is trying to help steer kids towards, but it's such an impossible task. I would feel so overwhelmed as a kid today.
Well, I think it's important for our generation to have compassion, because to have empathy and understanding for what these young people are facing, because it's easy to judge. And we know that every generation goes through this to a certain extent, in terms of like finding out what you believe in, finding out where your place is, where you belong, and discovering your identity. But I think that every generation goes through what the older generation goes through also, is looking back and looking at the kids and not understanding that they're going through that, and passing judgment and saying like, oh, these kids today, we used to laugh at that when we were that age. Like the older people saying, oh, these kids today, they're so, the world has gone to hell in a handbasket. It's like, no, you just don't understand that the world is different than it was when you were growing up. And so while we all have certain things that we go through in coming of age, the world that we're navigating is unique to us because the context changes. And so understanding like how weird the world is right now, to be young and going through that process at this moment in history is a real challenge.
But I hope, and my wish is that our generations older than us, the one thing that needs to change, I think, is the filter with which we look back on them. For example, when I had student loans, I paid them off, and I'm glad that I'm proud that I did. But when legislation comes up about forgiving student debt or things like that, and you hear this backlash of like, I had to pay, so they should have to pay. And I don't think that's how things should work. I think we should try to strive to improve where the next generation doesn't have to go through the bullshit that we went through that wasn't fair. Like kids that have $300,000 in medical bills or in college loans to pay off, like that's an 8-ball that they're starting out behind. Wouldn't that be wonderful to not have that? So why would we begrudge the next generation if progress happens where they don't have to do that? And so I think that's the thing, that it isn't just about the younger generation needs to change. It's the older generations needs to stop being so like offended or pissed off that the newer generation doesn't have to go through the same struggles that we went through. Like, good for them. Thank God. Let's try to make life easier for the next generation. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like that. Two wrongs don't make a right. You know, just because something was wrong before, does that mean
this is
it
the way
should
we've
be
always
wrong
done
forever?
Yeah, our healthcare system is so broken. Would I love to have a socialized medicine where everyone can? Yes, of course I would. And do I want my taxes to go to things that I may never see the benefit of? My son is getting older and he's growing. Am I going to still continue to pay into this school system when he's out and in college? Yes, because I want the next generation to have those same benefits. Like, there has to be a selflessness in society to make it work. You got to pay it forward. There's sort of a social contract. And I feel like so many people are pushing back against that now in terms of like, well, it doesn't have to do with me, so I'm not going to pay. Why should I pay for your health care? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other really big conversation that I think we probably can have on this show. We've been kind of figuring out like where the parameters are for some of these social issue conversations, where it crosses over into being a political show, which we don't want it to be. But at the same time, I think if it's things that are causing stress for people, we want to talk about it, and I think that what's going on in the culture, what's going on in our politics is relevant to our mental health, certainly, and vice versa. The mental health of our people and our culture is relevant to our politics. So they are conversations that I want to have, and I do want to have another episode where we talk about some of what you just talked about. I want to ask you, though, before we move into the interview part of this episode, you mentioned scams for a minute there.
Yeah.
And have we talked at all about scams and the world that we live in that regard, and my story about being scammed?
No, I don't believe so.
Should I share it now?
Please, please. I'm excited.
Because this is something that I hadn't really thought about for years. And then it came up in my own work. I think I was working with a client. I won't say anything too specific, but I was getting supervision with a client because this client had a background that was some illegal, felonious, taking advantage of people in that regard. And it brought up things for me that were, I didn't realize, still painful. When I was about, I want to say maybe about 12 years old. I don't know. It might have been 13, 14. I was old enough that my brother was out in the world somewhere. My parents had gone out to dinner and I was left alone. So I was old enough that I was able to fend for myself in the home. Mm-hmm. And I get a phone call. I answer. This is back in the days when ring, 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 phone on the wall in the kitchen. I pick it up, and this guy right off the bat starts talking really fast. And he says, "This is Detective such and such of the Los Angeles Police Department." He starts listing his badge number 976, whatever, And I'm like, so it sounds very official right off the bat. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm sitting there listening. He's like, listen, we have a man in your neighborhood that we're honing in on. We're going to apprehend him. He's been running scams all over the world, exploiting people. He describes the whole scam, which is that he gets people to accept charges for long distance phone calls, and he's selling this on the black market, or in some way that they're making thousands of dollars every day doing this. He's like, but here's the thing. He's in your area. You're going to start getting calls, and you need to accept the charges.
To entrap him.
Yeah. We're getting close. We need to triangulate his location. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to help the LA Police Department. I was just young enough that I was like, oh, it sounded so official.
Ryan Dusik, do-gooder.
Yeah, I was such a good little boy. So, I mean, to make the long story short, of course, I'm accepting these charges for long. Would you accept the charges to a call to Colombia? Do you accept the charges to a call in Italy?
Yes, I will.
Yes, I will. I'm doing my... And so finally, like an hour later, 2 hours later, whatever it is, my parents come home from dinner. And I'm like, you're not going to believe what's happening. I'm helping the LAPD apprehend this criminal who's scamming people. And my dad's like, what? And then it hits me like a ton of bricks. Like, the scam that he described to me is exactly what he's doing and scammed me into doing, right? And so thankfully my parents weren't angry with me, and they were like, it's understandable. Like, I was operating from the assumption that people say what they mean. They're honest. Like, I didn't come from a background where I would expect anyone to be otherwise. My parents were honest people. I thought people are inherently good. This was my first experience that somebody out there really intends to do harm and will take advantage of people and con you into doing something against your own interests. I had never even, I guess I must have known from movies and stuff that type of person existed, but I had never met that person in real life. And it was heartbreaking to me. I remember feeling really embarrassed, but at the same time, it was like one of those immediate loss of innocence moments where you're like, oh, the world isn't good.
The world sucks.
People aren't good. People will exploit you and harm you. And it just really sucked. I was like, I must have been about 12, because up until that point I was like in that Ozzie and Harriet world where
that's the age right away anywhere where you sort of loss of innocence, where you see the world for what it is, So wait, what happened? Like, were there charges on your phone bill?
Yeah, I think it was probably about $1,500 or something like that on the phone bill. And my parents, again, thankfully they weren't mad at me. They didn't blame me. They didn't say you have to pay this back. They were like, look, this is a learning experience. There are people out there that will take advantage of you. And so ever since then, and you've actually probably noticed this in conversations when this has come up in other contexts, the topic of online scamming, people like reach out to you and DM you, and at first it's like, oh, this is just someone being nice, or they're like they're interested in the show or whatever.
Right.
And then you quickly realize, at best they're trying to sell me something, but at worst they're trying to scam me in some way. Oh, it just makes my skin crawl. It gives me such an icky feeling. And I know that we get bombarded with that. It's easy to feel like, oh, this is what the world is. And it's probably a really small minority of people, and and things out there that are actually doing that kind of terrible
Right.
stuff. But everyone out there is running some game, and you look at the internet, it's like everyone's selling something. We've had conversations about you turn on TV or you watch the Super Bowl, and you just feel like the corporate overlords are just kind of running our world and trying to sell us things and dictating what we think we need. That's like the origin story of that for me. Why those things feel so icky to me, and why I don't like being sold something or feeling like I'm being manipulated in some way, because it just reminds me that like things aren't always on the up and up, and people can be exploitive.
That makes me really feel for you. Like that makes me sad that is the kind of like that, like you say, that loss of innocence, where because you want to believe in everybody, and you want to believe even the people who are scamming. You want to believe that they have a sick child that they have to raise money for. You know what I mean? Like, and you realize that most of it's automated anyways. Like, it's not a real person who's writing you that DM. It's a program that somebody wrote. But like, somebody took the time who was like, well, I can either go work at the local, gas station, or I can sit in my computer and write this code that might scam. You know what I mean? Like, it still took somebody made the choice to like, I'm going to try to defraud people. And it is a sort of a sad commentary or like realization when you realize that there are people like that. Somebody tried to buy a Cadillac Escalade once. My Social Security number got taken, and somebody opened a credit card, but that was it. That's the extent of my my brush with fraud. But yeah, it does feel. It feels yucky. I mean, it sounds like such a lame word, but it does. It just feels so gross. Of like, God, can't we all just try to find a way to get along without pulling everybody else, pulling everyone else down,
Well, I think this is another big topic that we can probably talk about and do another whole show on. We touch on this briefly in this conversation with Hillary Spiritos. Just, I talk about narcissism and sociopathy and the culture of these things. There's this debate as to whether people are inherently good or bad, or whether they can be conditioned into a certain context to do bad things. And I think good people are capable of doing bad things, and bad people are probably capable of doing good things, maybe for the wrong reasons. But I think culturally we're in an inflection point in terms of like, what are our values, and what dictates the way that we navigate with the world, and what are we placing priorities on? How are we defining success? What does it mean to be a good and successful person in this world? I don't want to give it away too much because we talk about this with Hillary, but I do want to talk about these things more, because I think this is very relevant to how we're navigating our mental health in today's world.
Well, if we do have a conversation about that, and you have some thoughts about it at home, you want to be a part of the conversation, drop us a line at heartedbreathepodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe and like the show on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Get involved in the conversation. We'd love to be told that we're wrong. We'd love to hear you say, Ryan Duck, you got it all wrong. I'm part of this generation. Let me tell you, here's why we're dispirited. Here's why we don't trust, things like that. I'd love to be told that I'm wrong. So please, follow us and drop us a line. Let us know what you think. You can be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. I love that. All right. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Pathfinding Coach Hillary Spiritos right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Hillary Spiritos, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast. How are you?
Hi. Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, this is cool. I was just telling Duck before we signed on that it was a pleasure reading over your website and some of your notes and things on the things that you like to talk about, because we've had a lot of coaches and things on people on the show, speakers and authors, and a lot of the time it's like to the niche of people who are already pretty successful, wanting to make more money, wanting to essentially, dominate the world. And not that I'm saying that's not what your clientele isn't aimed at, but just the fact that you chose young people sort of entering the world and finding themselves is unique to me, and your explanations for why and how you address that population are interesting and unique to me. So tell me, first off, just how you got into this area. Why did you pick that clientele? What's your sort of origin story for this?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. this work for me really started when I was an RA, when I was an undergrad at Duke University. And I just found that I really loved talking with this cohort of young people about who they were, what they were passionate about, what they were interested in, finding their place in the world, figuring out what they're capable of. And I then happened to be, or really wanted to be, an academic advisor at NYU and at Northeastern in Boston. And again, really loved these conversations and realized that young people were really needing someone who was not parents, friends, or a therapist to speak to. Because as well-meaning and helpful as those groups hopefully are, parents often can't relate to the world of today. Friends are an objective, and I 100% support therapy, but I think that sometimes they don't necessarily have a mental health condition that needs to be diagnosed. Maybe they just want someone to help them, guide them through their path of life. And so during the pandemic, actually, I opened up my business, Bad Outta Hell, because I had people, students, friends, family friends, all the people from different walks of life asking to speak to me and reaching out. And so I decided that there was this kind of in-between space that I wanted to engage with. And to answer your question about why this particular group, I think it's different. There are different reasons for this. I think one reason is that, again, a generalization, but from a young age, we are all doing the same thing at the same time, at the same pace. And I think university, and after university especially, is really when all of our forks diverge and we just don't really have any guardrails or any way to navigate how we're doing, and our guideposts was really what I meant to say. So I think that that's really important. It's really a space of the unknown, and I think that can be really exciting, but also definitely overwhelming and challenging. And I also think that this is a cohort of people that really just doesn't believe in the ethos of this is how it's always been done, and I'm just going to take what's coming at me. And I think that that is fiercely exciting and encouraging, and I really love the energy that this group comes with. And so it's just it's really soul feeding for me, and I hope for other people. So that would be my answer.
No, it answers the question. And it's funny because the first thing that I thought about when we were going to have you on the show is, there's so much disparaging said about a younger generation of oh, these kids, they don't know how good they have it. Our generation had to figure it out for ourselves. Well, that's not a good thing that we had to figure it out for ourselves. I think a younger generation, I give them credit for having the confidence to say, this isn't okay, and I want some guideposts, and so let's work together as a community to build a new path forward. You know what I mean? I think our generation and older generations who had to figure it out for themselves, there was a lot of trial and error, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Absolutely. And I think I want to say that it is true that young people of every generation have their own challenges. That's, of course, true. But I do think that there is something, many things actually, that are specifically challenging for this generation that make it harder. Whether it's social media, helicopter parenting, the COVID pandemic, whether it's all of the systems that are just crumbling that we're working with, whether it's housing, the corporate structure, higher education, healthcare, these young people are trying to get a grip and a grasp in a world that's constantly shifting and changing under their feet. And I think that it's not helpful to speak and belittle them in a way that is disparaging, but I do know that seems to be the case.
So you kind of answered my what was going to be my next question, which is this a uniquely challenging time and a generation that's uniquely challenged by the times? Is this generation itself unique, though? Because I kind of go back and forth on this. It's I've worked with teenagers and young adults, and I love working with young adults, by the way. It's teenagers can be obviously rebellious and just, think they know everything when they don't really know that much. And that can be frustrating because the buy-in is hard. But young adults, people in their 20s, they're just so desperately wanting something to help them find their direction and purpose. And that's that's a population that's inspiring to work with, because you see openness and willingness. But I go back and forth because I see every generation is trying to find itself, right? That's just like sort of the nature of growing up. As a teenager, you start searching. And then in your 20s, you're like, oh, wow, I thought I knew everything, but I don't. That's not specific to this generation. But are there things about this generation in their sort of makeup because of the context of the world that's different than previous generations? Or is what they're going through in trying to find themselves just a universal rite of passage that we all go through?
I honestly believe it's both. So,
Okay.
yes, there's a rite of passage that we all go through about trial and error, figuring out what we want to do, figuring out who we are, our place in the world, learning about the world. All of that is true. But I do think that some of the list, like the list that I said earlier, but also I do think there is a lack of comfort with the unknown. There is a real fear of the uncomfortable. I think there is a real fear of putting oneself out there, that this generation, partly because of what they dealt with in the COVID pandemic and helicopter parenting and social media and all of that, I do think this generation is really struggling with gaining and developing the skills and tools needed to move forward in their lives, which really means to me self-reliance, self-trust, resilience, the ability to tolerate discomfort, to stand alone, cultivating their own voice. I do think that this generation is struggling with that in a deeper level than previous generations have.
I think there's also a lack of a brass ring to reach for. You know, whether
Sure.
it was our parents' generation, the goal was you get a job at General Motors and you work there for 30 years, you get your gold watch. Our generation was you begin a startup, you join a tech company, but at least you know you're going to have health insurance, you're going to have your 401k and your retirement. I think kids today look and go, is Social Security going to be here in 5 years? Is healthcare going to be the same? Is there going to be a career? Is there, there's nothing to shoot towards in terms of something stable. And I think personally, my own take on it is the COVID pandemic was an inflection point in any generation. I had a son who was in kindergarten during COVID, so that whole generation of kids, they missed those first cooperative play, they missed sharing, they missed that socialization. So you got a ton of kids. Not that there aren't a ton of kids on iPads and stuff, but you have a ton of kids who that's how they learned how to interact. If I think of kids who were 15 and during the COVID pandemic, from 15 to 17 or 15 to 18 is a huge impact, a huge step in development and growth. And if they don't have that, now that they're 22, they're in the workforce or they're in the social world and they don't have the skills to interact with people, talk on the phone, the things that just come naturally to a lot of us. And so I see the COVID pandemic as like the main developmental roadblock for a lot of the kids of this generation.
Sure, there's absolutely an argument to be made for that. I mean, yeah, the idea that you finished your schooling online, whether that was good for you academically or not, there's this idea of how to operate in an office, how to answer the phone, how to write an email. Do I even want to work in an office? I've never even had a first job. How do I have an interview? That young people are increasingly bringing their parents to interviews. So it's just like, oh, absolutely. When I worked in higher education, a lot of my meetings were with parents alongside their students, right? So it's part of that is the pandemic, but part of that is not knowing how to do a lot of these things on your own because your parents have often done them for you.
Well, let's dive into that a bit because I agree with you, Duck. And I would add to it, I want to get into the topic of social media later because that's a big one for me in terms of an inflection point. But you mentioned parenting as being a big difference for this generation. And I'm Gen X, but I was probably at the young end of Gen X, and I can relate a lot to the millennial generation in terms of the onset of that sort of helicopter parenting and over-involvement and sort of we all get trophies. And for me, that was probably entitlement building. I think the millennial generation felt probably kind of like, well, the world is our oyster. We all deserve success. And this younger generation now has kind of flipped on that in terms of like, we don't know if if anything is going to come to us, but our parents are holding our hands through all of it in these ways that you're describing, like going into job interviews. I can relate to that too, though. So I'm curious, if you look at, obviously these are well-meaning parents. These are parents that want to help and protect their kids. This isn't abusive, harmful stuff. It's just you go too far to another extreme trying to solve a problem, and you end up with another problem. So I'm not blaming parents in mentioning that. But I'm curious, how do we build, you mentioned self-reliance and confidence and going out into the world and being able to handle these things on your own when you've been raised in that way, when you haven't, when you're in a world in which you don't know if you can handle things on your own. And it is a particularly challenging world. That's a tough job to try to teach that to someone who's now coming into the workforce themselves for the first time trying to develop those skills. So how do you do that?
That's a great question. So I think it is a great question. I think I first would like to say that each person is different. So the answer to your question is different for everybody. So that depends on how they're going to intake the information and what they're dealing with and what just resonates with them. So there's no general easy fix answer here. One thing that I think is really important that I try to engage with my clients is the idea of precedent. So understanding what in your life you have done previously in which you have stepped outside of your comfort zone or tried something new and realized that you thrived or you survived and you're okay. And I think what clients often tell me is that these things don't register for them. So I think we have a misunderstanding of our idea of what courage is. And I think that that's really important. So there's this idea that we have these huge, like what is courageous is going into a burning building and moving to a different country and all these big things. And I don't think we really take into account whatever you want to call them, smaller things that we do that take courage from us, of us. And that's one thing that I really try to get at with my clients and stop them when they mention something and say, do you see that took like self-reliance or resilience or courage to do that? Do you see that not everybody around you is doing that? And I think noticing these things and taking stock of the things that you've done is very important in recognizing what you're capable of. And I also think this idea of it's about connecting and taking control and ownership of your fears, insecurities, and anxieties, and deciding that you don't want them to control your life. You don't want to live your life in that way. You don't want to bow down to those fears, insecurities, and anxieties. And in my practice and in my belief, the way you take ownership of that is by forging and developing a relationship with your inner child. And that is also the work that we do with my clients.
So let's talk a little bit about social media, because, I think that for me, that as I've seen in my clients, the younger generation, but really every generation at this point is affected by this. The pandemic certainly affected us in the ways that you described, Duck, but going back 10, 15, 20 years now with the advent of more and more living online and the young generation growing up with that. And I see it not just a problem in terms of addiction and making people more anxious or, the comparison economy. People are constantly looking at what other people are doing and feel like they're failing. I'm not as good looking as them. I'm not as successful as them. There's so many ways that social media affects young people in particular, but all of us. I feel like it's a tool that is designed to brainwash, right? It is essentially a way in which we get fed information either that confirms what we already believe or persuades us and has an agenda that is economic or political or whatever it may be. So we don't really know what to believe anymore. It's so confusing as to who we are, what matters, what our value system is, and all we're left with is this feeling that we're failing in some way and that we have these things to live up to that we're not. I cannot imagine being a young person growing up with that being the sort of major influence on self-development. So how do you navigate that? That's the big one to me.
Sure. Well, I think there are a couple things to pick apart here. So social media does play a part in this, but we are living in a choose your own reality type of world, which is not solely social media. I mean, even if you watch the news, that's true, right? That's true in the people that you talk to on a daily basis. So I think that's difficult to figure out, and you have to that's really hard work to engage with people of a different political sphere, of a different religion, of a different ethnicity, all of that. In regard to social media particularly, yeah, it's very challenging, and I do think it is quite detrimental. And so I do think it's very important for young people to take breaks and to recognize that whatever anybody else is doing in their lives is academic. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have any relevance to your life. And it is just a constant practice. It is rewiring your neural pathways about how, I mean, on social media, everyone looks like they're a millionaire and living their dream life by the time that they're 20 years old. Like, that's probably not that person's reality anyway. But it's about stepping back a little bit and realizing, like, is that the way you want to spend your time? How does that serve you? It turns out that most people would answer that it doesn't serve them in a way that is beneficial. And I also think it's helpful to note, or really crucial to note, that is not a substitute for connection. So it is not a substitute for friendship. It is not a substitute for, there is no substitute for face-to-face interaction. And I think that that's something that young people are really struggling with. We have a loneliness epidemic going on, and it's necessary. And I do think that young people are really looking for the third space, that place that is out in the real world. That's why online dating is struggling, because young people are really looking to meet people in the wild and meet friends in the wild. That's why running groups are surging. That's why coffee shops are like opening up. That's why people want to really re-engage, because I think young people, I find more and more, are frustrated and disillusioned with it.
Are there things that can be unlocked in social media that maybe this generation hasn't figured out, or that you can teach them to sort of use more efficiently, in whether it's in the job search or workforce, but also in terms of learning what's real and what isn't, and not relying on the comparison like Ryan was talking about? But are there things that you can teach, or things that you do teach, that sort of shows people how to use it more efficiently, more honestly? You know what I mean? It's sort of a vague question, but you understand my question?
Sure, I think so. And as much as I, gave that impassioned speech, I do not think that social media is the devil, right? I do think there is some benefit to it. I do think there is networking possibilities. I do think there is job search possibilities. People put a lot online that isn't posted on LinkedIn, or things that us oldies like to use, So people do a lot of stuff on social media that is connective, that is beneficial. I mean, there is a woman on social media who has chronicled her whole job search and has given out tips and tricks to doing that. There are a lot of body positive influencers that talk about not basing your self-worth on your looks and on your size. So I think that it is helpful. And there are a lot of people on social media who actually do a before and after. This is photoshopped. Can't you see that this isn't my reality? This kind of truth telling. So that's not everyone. There are a lot of people who don't use it that way and try to use it in a performative way. And there's also the people who run these companies that are pushing out adverts for people who, I just heard a statistic that was, if girls erase some selfies of them, the algorithm starts pushing out beauty products to them. So that's pretty disturbing, if that's accurate. So I think that, you really have to be conscious of it.
Well, you've touched on an issue that's, in my mind, a pretty big deal for this generation. It's something that's kind of a hot button issue, and that's gender norms and gender issues that are related to the kind of content that people are consuming, the people that are engaging with, you see the manosphere, for instance, and the way that's influencing young men and trying to sort of exploit disillusioned young men. Do you see this, if you're game to touch on this topic, are there unique challenges based upon whether you're a young man of this generation or a young woman of this generation? Is one more challenged than the other, or There's a lot of people identifying as non-binary these days. How does that factor into the work that you're doing in terms of how these young people are coming into the world as we know it today? Are there populations that are uniquely challenged? And if so, what can they do about it?
That is a great question. And so, yes, the answer is that not only is every human being uniquely challenged, right? Because life is challenging and everything is challenging in your own way, how you perceive of it. I wouldn't necessarily say that one group is more challenged than others, but I would say that each group, whether it's political, gender discriminatory, or like age or sex or, race. I mean, I do think that each group has their own challenges, and that, I mean, there are people that don't trans people are definitely experiencing their challenges here in this world. And then men, if you want to go the manosphere, that's toxic masculinity that they're dealing with, or the feeling that they can't find a partner. But then you have women who are also struggling with the same, can't find a partner, but then their rights are being stripped away systematically. So I would say, I wouldn't put one above the other, but I would say that there are unique challenges to every group of people. And I think it's important to recognize that clients might come into me talking about switching their major at university, or changing their job, or finding their partner, or what have you. But regardless, everyone is dealing with the constant pressure of what is going on in the world today, and whether that's war, economic issues, whether that's social issues and social warfare. I mean, I think that everyone is, with climate change, everyone is dealing with these big, serious issues. So there is a serious weight that I don't think you can negate that from anyone's life at this time. So it's woven in through everything.
So is there a path through? I mean, I have to assume that that's the first message that you have to send to any first client is like, it's going to be okay. We're going to find a path through. But do you find that there is a solitary through line for most of your clients in terms of what they're searching for and what the guidance that they're looking for? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say that the through line, I would say, is that people want to live their fullest, fiercest, most authentic life in a way that is sustainable for them. And that means financially sustainable, but also just enjoyment. And they don't want to be locked in a job that they hate. And so I think that's kind of as much as a through line as I can give, because for every single person, that is different. So whether that's I have a client who really thinks they've been working in business for many years, and they've just realized that they actually hate it, and they really want to do, they've always been drawing and really want to do graphic design instead, and they have never given themselves the opportunity to do that. I have a client who has always planned to going to medical school and realized that she couldn't make herself do the med school applications, and realized that wasn't even what she wanted to do at all. And that was more something her parents wanted. So I think it's more so a question of, what do you want? What do you value? Really? Who are you really? And what is blocking you from creating the life you imagine, and also being able to imagine the life you want to create? And for that answer is different for everybody, but then it's working through that and then creating a strategic, actionable plan so that they can continue that moving forward.
Got it.
It's interesting to me. I've spoken a few times to some college classes at NYU and USC, particularly in the music industry department, which is its own specific niche. But what the professors that I came and spoke in their classes shared with me, and I noticed when I was there, was the young people entering, especially in a university like that. These are very high-end, wealthy private universities. You mentioned, finding your identity as separate from what your parents want for you, and when your parents are spending six figures per tuition year at this point to send you to school, and that's not everyone. This is obviously at the most elite end, but that's the extreme version of what a lot of young people growing up are feeling, is how am I going to live up to what my parents want for me, versus who am I separate from that. That's a real challenge for anyone in terms of finding identity, but also in terms of defining what success is, right? And that's something that you talk about. I'd love to hear your perspective on how you help these people in those positions redefine what success is, and whether it's aligned with what your parents want for you or not. That can be tricky, right?
Absolutely. I kind of see that as two different questions. So redefining what success is huge and pivotal and crucial. And I think that that's true same as redefining failure, same as redefining courage. And we want to ask, like, where did you learn that definition of what success is? And some people that is very clear, and some people that is a little bit more dormant, and it comes through in conversation. And when it does, it's a pause and asking, like, I had a client say, oh, but that's not good enough. And, the question is, like, what does that mean? Why is it not good enough? Where did you get that definition from? What are the stories that we have told ourselves, or like the messages that we have heard from others in our community that have formed this? And it is unrooting, it is bringing that to light. That is the only way that you can change that definition. And that's what I mean by like creating a relationship with your inner child, because often so much of our definition of success, failure, courage, all of that comes from what we learned as young kids. In terms of your parents, I think that it is about figuring out, one, is it true? So you might have this idea that your dad really wants you to go into business and follow in his footsteps, but you might not have ever had that conversation with him. So the first question is that true? Have you asked them? Have you engaged in that conversation? And then I would say, do you want to be an adult in your own life? I don't necessarily put it that way, but it's the question of, have you sat down and talked to your parents and say, I don't know what I'm really doing at the moment. Like, I don't know exactly what my next job or my next step would be, but I really am working on figuring it out. And this is my plan. Or are you like engaging with them as a young person, trying to like look at them for answers? And in that case, that is not an adult. That is someone who is like looking for the approval of other people. And that is what we want to get away from.
Another thing I noticed in speaking with these kids in college, and this is kind of getting back to the topic of gender, a lot of the young ladies in these classes, do people say young ladies anymore? Women?
Not really.
Girls. I'm sounding like a boomer now. A lot of the women in these classes were very empowered, motivated, driven young women, which was inspiring to see. And to see, all the progress that we've made in terms of the feminist movement, which I'm a big supporter of, is wonderful, and seeing it paying off in those ways. But at the same time, noticing that the boys seem a little bit more meek, more submissive, and a little bit more challenged in terms of what is my role and what is my identity. We're talking about identity. And this is the space in which, we talked about the manosphere, that influence comes in, because they're taking advantage of these young men who are feeling diminished, feeling like they're losing their place in the world. They have a lot of fear, resentment, and anger around that. Is that something you're running into in your work? Do you work with both young men and young women? And do you notice that difference shift in terms of the confidence? Look, it's not that I look back and I say, I think that young men are experiencing now what women have experienced throughout eternity in terms of feeling diminished, feeling like, they don't have as much agency in the world, and the options that they have are very limited in terms of how to pursue success, how to, what is there to have a good life, what to have a fulfilling life. So it's just kind of flipped a little bit in terms of the nature of the context of today's world, but it is causing a lot of problems. And I do have a lot of compassion for young men who are dealing with that. And it's causing problems in terms of the shift towards this hyper masculine reaction. So do you deal with young men that are feeling diminished or compensating in that way? And how do you work with that population?
Sure. I mean, yes, I do work with young men and young women, and anyone who identifies as non-binary. I have no guardrails there. I do think that it's a really interesting question. I definitely speak to young men who have more traditional views of masculinity. And I have definitely come across young men who are struggling figuring out what their role and place in society or in their relationship or in their job is. I've definitely come across young men who have spoken to me about, making less money than their like partners do, or I've spoken to young men about figuring out how to navigate the world as a young man, because that is challenging, as you point out. So I think I just really hesitate to give a blanket statement, because I really think that it is so different for everybody. But I think getting to the root of why they feel that is necessary, why they feel that that is a conflict within them, helping them figure out what other avenues they can release that tension, what other avenues they can realize are open to them. That's where I would go. But I wouldn't necessarily say that there's like a cure-all of what to do in this situation. I think it's very nuanced, for sure.
I think some of it is also, like we talked about, the kind of curated world that we are presented in social media. If there is an insecure young man who sees, well, if I say, I mean, even look at us now, we're trying to talk about young women, and you don't want to say young women, you don't want to say girls, you don't want to sorry, I'm blanking on a word.
It's tough to talk these days.
Yeah, that's the thing. You don't want to isolate or alienate someone who isn't a cisgender man or woman. So it's like we even struggle, and we like to think of ourselves as relatively evolved men of a certain age. And so I would imagine if you're a 20-year-old and you're in a class and you speak up and you say, well, I think girls do this, and then suddenly there's a grumble, excuse me, we're women, and you go, I don't. There would definitely be an instinct to kind of clam up and go, well, I can't win. And then suddenly you're presented with a community that says, we say girls, forget about it. Don't worry about it. Don't have to qualify it. Just say girls. And suddenly you go, oh, I feel safe here. I feel seen. I feel included. It's no different than a kid joining a gang if they don't have a family. It's like there's the feeling of belonging is so much more important than we give credit to. And I think that's what is missed so often when we go, why are young people gravitating towards this kind of a hateful group or something that seems to go backwards in time in terms of our development as a society. And I think there's so much to what you say about just wanting to feel safe, wanting to belong. And so I think that's the root of Ryan's question is like, do you see men, specifically men, I think, because that's the crux of the issue that we're talking about, is like, yearning for like someone just tell me where is safe, tell me what path I can navigate where I'm not going to get judged in this way, canceled this way. You know what I mean? It's got to be such a difficult road to walk at that age. Sure. You know what I mean? Sure.
And it is definitely very challenging. I do want to point out, though, that there is, yes, the manosphere is huge, and there is toxic masculinity out there in social media and in the news and all this stuff. I do want to point out that there are really great male role models that exist on all of these platforms that young men can turn to, and also hopefully in their lives, whether it's family, friends, or a teacher or coach or whomever. But I do agree. I think that belonging is vital. And I think that part of what we're dealing with is the loneliness epidemic, and that people are struggling and searching for connection. And I just would hesitate to say that I do see it in young men in my practice, but I also see it with young women. And I also see it with young people in general who are searching for somebody to tell them the answers. And the work that I do with young people is the answers are within. Right? We want to learn to look within and find the answers that way, than constantly looking for approval from outside and other people. I'm never going to tell a client what they should or shouldn't do. We're going to work together to find the answer that way. So I think that young people is a generation that is looking outward. It is a generation that's looking at social media, looking for people to tell them what's acceptable. And I think that that's one of the issues that we're dealing with, for sure.
Which is nothing new, right? Like we were talking earlier, every generation is searching for identity, searching for direction. And especially, I think, as you reach a certain age of young adulthood, looking for a cause, looking for something to believe in, but also to belong to, a community that is like-minded. And, I was thinking about this. I want to make a point on this. The term toxic masculinity, I think we need to stop using that term, because the problem is not masculinity. There's nothing inherently wrong with masculinity or femininity or anything in between. The problem is narcissistic sociopathy. Right?
Doesn't roll off the tongue as well.
No, but you said, you see boys with similar issues as girls. There's nothing that one gender owns in terms of what can be toxic. Mm-hmm. Anyone of any background and every subgroup of any demographic is capable of being a wonderful human being or of being a toxic human being. It has nothing to do with gender or with ethnicity or with race. It has to do with your value system and the ways that you act in the world, your behavior, right? And if you are brainwashed in this way of thinking that it's all about me and getting my needs met, and every relationship in your life is transactional, and everything you do is about achieving some success that you've defined for yourself, no matter whom it harms in the process, which is kind of the role model that manosphere is kind of presenting, which is this, it's not, I don't want to use toxic masculinity. It's this puffing out your chest and saying, I'm so great and I deserve everything in the world that comes to me and I'm going to take it. It's understandable why people relate to that, because people feel lost. And when you feel lost, you're searching for something that makes you feel powerful when you feel powerless. So really look, we see young women that are struggling with narcissism. We see young men that are struggling with narcissism. We see everything in between. That's a compensation for the insecurities and fears that we feel in the world today. So really the answer for me is dealing with the vulnerabilities that we're all feeling underneath that. And that's what I see as the major issue, whether it be the future that is so undetermined and so open right now in terms of climate change, in terms of our politics, in terms of the financial and economic world, whether it's just, the comparisons that we make and looking at social media online. Young men and young women and everything in between are looking at the world and feeling insecure. They're feeling like they don't know where their place is, they don't know where they belong, and so they're looking to these influences to define that for them a lot of the times. So it sounds like you're describing, in terms of social media, sort of finding a balance where you're able to separate from that to a certain extent.
Sure. I mean, if you feel so inclined to absolutely delete it, that is also great. The idea is that we don't want it to overwhelm and take over. If you can find a balance, that we will work on a balance. If you feel like you're like, I can't do a balance, I need to delete it, that's also an option. It's about figuring out what is correct and the right thing for you, and the right thing for you at the moment. Because I think what's important to recognize is that you can try to find a balance now and completely delete it later, or the opposite, right? Paths are winding. You're not choosing. I think that's something that I deal with clients a lot. Their idea is that they have to choose the right thing right now, because that means that they're stuck with it. And I think what's really cool about the world today, even though it's in some ways crumbling, I do think that there's this openness that, there's no such thing as a career anymore, right? How cool is that? You're like, oh, I don't just sit behind a desk and do the same thing for 50 years. Dope. There's issues, right? Of course, whether that's healthcare and whether that's like socialization and whether that's a paycheck, there's all these other things. But I think it's reframing this and I do think young people are doing this to some extent, reframing this as a world of opportunity that they can shape to make work for them. That is really exciting. That's not to negate or belittle any of the other things that we've been talking about, but I do think, is this just anxiety provoking, or is this anxiety provoking and exciting at the same time? And I think that's the question I ask them about, literally everything. Is this move exciting, or is it just something you don't want to do? Is it both? Which is, in that case, let's live in it.
Let's pounce on it and take advantage of it. Yeah. Do you feel any of that pressure yourself in this career that you have chosen to sort of? Do you feel any of the pressure of okay, well, they're looking to me for these answers? I tell the story of I was very hesitant to become a baseball coach because I'm not the best baseball player for my son, and I don't want to be the guy that's responsible for teaching a kid how to throw incorrectly, and then 10 years down the line someone goes, who the hell taught you to throw like this? And they're gonna be like, it was Doc, and I'm gonna feel the shame. Do you feel any of that pressure of well, these kids are looking to me for answers, and what if I give them the wrong direction, or but I feel like I know the answer to it, but I want to ask you, do you feel any of that pressure?
Sure. I would say yes. The answer is sometimes I do feel there's a let's not say pressure, but there's definitely a responsibility. I don't take what I do lightly. I think that these are people's lives, and that isn't a joke.
Right.
So I think that while the work that I do is joyous, and I do think that I like to believe that I'm funny and cool. So, it's not serious and dour and terrible and, but I do think that I do take it like as a responsibility. However, again, as I said, like I'm never telling anyone what they should and shouldn't do. So I'm never I'm not concerned that I'm giving someone the wrong answer, because I believe that if you look at your life and you look inward and you create the life that you want to live at this time, are you doing what you want to be doing right now? Then that's great. I'm someone who wants to live a big, expressive, full of experiences life. I keep moving around different places. I've pivoted jobs previously. I'm someone who really reaches out and grabs on and goes, screw it, let's do it. However, if I'm with a client and they're like, what's really right for me is I want to work for my parents' company in the small town and I want to marry my high school sweetheart, awesome, badass, right? Because that is something that they want to do and that is right for them in that moment. So I'm sure they could talk to some other coach and that coach could be like, I would do it this way.
Right. Quit your job and cut your parents off. Never speak to them again. Right. That's the way to win.
And I would say, I don't really agree with that. But so I don't know. I think that, or I do know, I think that this is just a really personal journey. And I think that people are interesting and that's what keeps the work interesting. And and I in no way think that I have all the answers. I mean, and the fact is I've learned so much from my clients in the way that I engage with my own life and just the way that I would talk to the next client that I mean, if I were to ever say I'm done learning, I've figured it all out, I've cracked it, I don't know if that's a real, I would look at that person and be like, she's crazy.
Yeah.
What a weirdo. I would never take advice from that person.
Gotcha.
So how do you define success then? You talk about redefining success for young people. You've chosen a certain field and a certain business model. What is success for you in terms of your career, in terms of your life in general?
Whoa, those are two different. They're intertwined.
They're hand in hand. Yeah.
I would say the way I understand success is, for me personally, is if I have am I doing what I want to be doing at this time? Am I engaging with the world in the way that I want to engage with? Am I constantly growing? I think that my path in life, I'm never want to stop growing and learning. So I think that's part of why I'm constantly trying new things and building new experiences and going in. I prefer the unknown to the known. That's success for me. I also have this business that I really am passionate about. So I would love that to be successful. And what I mean by that is I just care about helping young people live the lives that they want to live and live their fiercest, fullest, most authentic, badass lives that is sustainable for them, and so that they can build the skills and tools needed to make those decisions themselves on their own. They're not supposed to stay with me forever. And to recognize how to muster up the courage to move forward in the face of obstacles, in the face of blocks, how to look inward and listen to their inner voice and figure out, oh, if I do this thing, I'll be okay because I can trust in myself. I'll do it because I know who I am. That's all of what I believe success is for me.
Now, you've chosen a clientele that's young and pre-finding their path, pre-finding the kind of success, however they define it, that they're looking for. As a business model, it's curious because there's a reason why a lot of coaches call themselves executive coaches and such, because they want to work with people who make a lot of money and can afford to pay a coach a lot of money, right? So it seems almost like deeply altruistic and maybe economically not the most wise business choice to choose a clientele that doesn't probably have a lot of money. Is there a method to that madness, or?
Well, I do think that there are people in the clientele that I work with that do make a lot of money. And I think that there are, whether that's families who make a lot of money and there are people that don't. I definitely believe in access. So I'm never going to create my pay scale is sliding. I'm never going to say I'm not gonna work with you because you can't afford me. That's not the way I operate. I also think that this generation and this cohort are people that definitely need someone who is there for them and in their corner and speaks to them and listens to them and believes that they are valued and wants to see, hear, and listen to them. And who's an objective near peer who has been through it in the world of today and knows the ins and outs of how to navigate today's world. And I also just, at this point in my career, because again, who knows, but talking to executives in business isn't necessary. Well, let's not say this. The work that I'm doing right now is really soul feeding. And the group, I mean, I worked in higher education. I've worked in study abroad. These are the people that I think are like kicking ass and taking names. And these are the stewards of our planet. So I'm like, it's really quite important that we talk to these young people, and they're just so cool. So I don't know. This is the population that I want to work with, whether that's, perceived as not economically viable. I don't know, but like, it's just, yeah.
No, but Ryan,
I love that.
So I was just going to say, Ryan, I can paraphrase you in your speech at Pepperdine a couple of weeks ago. Is you talked about self-care and how important it is. I think this is a generation that prioritizes self-care. If it's the difference between, to use the parlance of our time, get an extra avocado toast or a Starbucks, they'd rather put that money towards something that's going to feed their soul and help themselves. Yes. So I think that they do have a sense of, hey, this is important and this is worth spending the money on if I can. You know what I mean? So if I can speak for that generation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that more and more. There is a shifting priority where young people, maybe it's out of necessity, necessity is the mother of invention, where people are having some of the insecurities that you're describing in terms of, I don't know if I'm going to have health insurance. I don't know if I'm going to have Social Security, all these things. It's like, I need to put my money where my mouth is and the resources that I do have towards thinking about my future and thinking about what's going to make my life, more fulfilling and more successful in whatever way I choose to define that. Mm-hmm. Whereas in previous generations, you had the privilege of just going like, well, I'm just going to, meander around for a while and figure it out as I go. I think people are prioritizing those things. And I apologize if that was a kind of a difficult question to answer. I was half joking, but I think that that's part of the reason why, I was interested in having you on, because it's like, you, in the very work that you're doing, have chosen to prioritize something that feels purposeful to you. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that it can't be hugely financially successful too. It's just that the number one driving force sounds like a value system, something that you care about and that you're passionate about, and then it's being of service to this population that needs that help first and foremost. And I see that as a problem in terms of where we've gone as a culture and what young people are growing up in, is that we're more and more driven by, do I have the yacht that I see on TikTok? Do I look like that person with the fillers and the abs and the whatever? That's how I'm defining whether I'm successful and happy, as opposed to, am I a good person? Do I care about something and have meaning and purpose in my life, and how does that relate to my relationships, to the work that I do, to the person that I am, rather than the image that I create.
Sure. And I think that's part of the work that I do with my clients is, what is success? What are your values? And if somebody says, I value money, great. That is great. That is not a problem, right? It is something that you value. So I personally value doing something purposeful, like with my life, doing something that is of service. I also, and I'm not, again, not to say that those two things are mutually exclusive, but I also think that it's important to note that it's hard to sustain something that is not purposeful or something that you do not have a connection to. And I find that young people often feel like they don't necessarily have something that they can sustain because they just don't care about it or don't enjoy it. And the idea is, I've been able to sustain this and do this through the ups and downs because it just means a lot to me and is something I fiercely care about and enjoy. And like when I speak to a client who starts coaching themselves in the session, or who like realizes that, oh, I really am going to make this change, or really speak to my parents in some way, or speak to my partner, like that's really gratifying to me. And I think it is very gratifying to them and really life-changing. And I think that is, we want to find that thing for the young people of today. And I just think that there's no really, that's what it's about, isn't it? That's like, we're living here. Like, I didn't choose to be here, but why don't I make myself like have this life that is meaningful and interesting to me? And then that can change later on. But let's do it.
Well, I agree with you. You know, I feel the same way that a successful life for me is one that is filled with purpose and the ability to continuously learn and grow. If you have that ability, then you are privileged, you know, to be able to have the freedom to pursue the things that you're passionate about and to continue to find new horizons. That's an exciting life. That's an interesting life. And just, you know, sort of ironically, if you do feel purpose and passion and you invest yourself in things with that purpose and passion, you will probably be more successful because you will invest yourself more wholly in something. If you're doing something just because your parents want you to do it, or you're doing it because, you know, it's what the Joneses are doing, and I feel like I have to do this to keep up, you're more likely to fail because it's not what you actually care about. It's not something you're invested in on a very deep level. You have no connection to it. And the person who is those things is going to beat you at that thing, right?
Sure.
They're going to have, so I think that while it is important to be practical, and I don't want to give, you know, sort of privileged advice. It's like, just follow your passions and don't think about what's going to be sound for your future and stuff like that. But there is a sweet spot, it sounds like, in between just pursuing quote unquote success as defined by what we see as the image online of success, as opposed to finding something fulfilling and purposeful. If you can combine those two things in some way, if you can find a way to monetize something that is close to your value system, you're going to be more successful in general.
Sure, absolutely. And that's a great point. I mean, like, you have to be able to financially sustain your life. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
I do think it's also important to say that no one goes through life unscathed, right? So like, at some point you're going to have to deal with this. So whether you deal with it now and you kind of can learn to navigate this kind of uncomfortable, growing feeling of the unknown, or you can turn around later and realize that you were doing something because someone else told you to once, or because you thought you were supposed to. And I think personally, I think that one is more painful than the other. And I think that either you're going to get uncomfortable because of your decision, like you're going to say, I'm going to make a change, or life's going to make you uncomfortable and you're going to realize at one point that this wasn't what you're supposed to be doing. So I think I would encourage young people in a time that is of exploration, your 20s or your early 30s. I would say, like, take the time now, because you don't want to look, what's scariest to me is looking back and realizing that this is like really, and it's the number one regret of the dying, to realize like, this is not the life I wanted to live. I didn't live this for me. And that is heartbreaking. So I would say
there's a reason that the midlife crisis is such an epidemic, in terms of you get to middle age and you go, did I just spend the last 25 years of my life doing something I didn't enjoy or didn't love? So hopefully the work that you're doing is going to eliminate the midlife crisis for the next generation. They're all going to be doing and following their heart, and they're feeding their souls instead of their 401k.
So change is very like useful and should happen. Like, I think you should take the time often to reevaluate whether it is what you want to be doing. Mm-hmm. But I do think we're saying the same thing for sure here.
So last question for you, Hillary. Bat Out of Hell is the name of your coaching program. When I hear that phrase, of course, I think of meatloaf. I'm sure old enough to remember.
all Gen Zers think of meatloaf. They love that.
Exactly. So why it feels like a little bit of a misnomer when you just hear it right off the bat, but I know that there's a reason for that. So can you tell us what Bat Out of Hell means to you? Sure.
I mean, firstly, I'd like to say that I love meatloaf, so we're great. But yeah, I've always felt a real kinship with bats. I actually know that they have gotten a bad rep recently, but I think that they are perceptive, social, adaptable creatures that spend a lot of their time upside down. So they're all about seeing the world from a different perspective. And they symbolize transformation and rebirth and the shedding of the old to come into the new and out of the darkness and into the light. And all of that stuff I just really resonate with. And I also think that I'm just not a cookie cutter, this is how it's always been done person, let alone coach. So I just wanted a name that was a bit rock and roll, a bit edgy, a bit left of center, because I just don't, I wanted something that had that ethos of we're gonna get into it. We'll figure it out. I'll never leave your side, but it's gonna be hard and it's gonna be interesting, and I just didn't want Hillary Spiritos coaching at the moment, you know?
Excellent. Well, I like it. It definitely stands out, and it does give you a little bit of that edge, which is, as a rock and roll guy, I appreciate the edginess.
Thank you.
Probably better than Paradise by the Dashboard Light coaching. It doesn't have the same.
Or I would do anything.
Yeah, also could be good.
I would do anything for that yacht, but I won't do that.
Exactly.
Great. Totally.
We're just workshopping here. We're brainstorming.
That's the name of this episode. So. Well, Hillary, this has been really an enlightening conversation and a lot of fun to get into it with you. I appreciate your time and your energy.
Wonderful. It was great. Thank you for having me. It's so fun to talk to people that are like-minded.
Tell our listeners where they can find the Bat Out of Hell and find you, and if they are interested in finding out about your program.
Sure, absolutely. So my website is batoutahell, BATOUTTAHELL.net. My TikTok and Instagram are bat.outta_hell. And yeah.
I know. We'll put it on the screen because my brain is already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am accepting new clients for 2025, which is really interesting for my program, as well as just meeting on a regular basis outside of my program. Or you can schedule a consultation call if you want to kind of learn more about me or the work that I do. We can discuss it that way. But yeah, absolutely.
Do you do it all online or is it in person as well, or?
Both. I actually travel internationally to meet. If I'm in your neighborhood, I'll meet you in person. But I currently live in the UK, so I work with my UK clients in person as well, and then I'll work with clients over Zoom.
Gotcha.
Like abroad.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, Hillary. Hillary Spiritos has been our guest on today's episode of the Hard to Breathe podcast. Tune in every Tuesday for new episodes, and we'll see you next time right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast.